Armies in Stellaris. Currently, if you have the bigger number, you're extremely likely to win. This mechanic is always the hot topic for changes. In this video, we will discuss the current army mechanics and alternate army implementations to see if it's really an area the development team should focus on. The best way and really only way to conquer other planets is to get big numbers with good units. This is due to combat width, which only allows a certain number of troops to fight at a time. Leaders, civics, traits, and origins can all buff them up, and ships can also bombard planets which damage troops, but there's not too much else to it. The alternative to ground combat is to either A, bomb the planet to oblivion with your ships, or B, crack it, or the star near it. You can combine FTL inhibition, which you gain from a tier 2 stronghold on your planet, to really hold a choke point. That's if you get lucky with planet spawns or build a habitat there. Essentially, armies serve as a speed bump to any enemies trying to conquer you, which in my opinion isn't too bad. This system is relatively simple, allowing it to be usually an afterthought in an already complex game. However, let's see some alternatives to see if this system could be improved upon to make the game more fun. So what alternatives could there be? Thankfully, we have mods to really get a feel of them. The first mod is Planetary Assault Army and Ship. All mods will be in the description. This idea adds armies to ships, potentially removing the pain of having to build armies separately. Each ship has a unit type and drop pod, both scale with text. They also have components for more army drop pod. As you can see, invading works similarly to ground combat, just with our ships. There's also an expansion to this mod which adds more troop upgrade components, it adds support companies, and overall just expands on previous ideas. I think potentially just removing armies and combining them with the existing ship layout could be an extreme solution, but could have its merits. I sometimes sigh at the thought of having to build even more armies, so them being combined with the more exciting shipbuilding aspect of fleets could be great. The next mod is Military Enhancement. This mod heavily expands on existing army mechanics. It adds new policies such as recruitment methods and training quality, more technologies that buff armies, and allows you to construct free special buildings, which allows access to train specific types of units. There's also 11 unique armies. There's also an edict which you can only activate once at war, which increases alloy production, troop training speed, and decreases training costs. But this will cost you consumer goods and energy production. There's also a bunch of rebalancing. This idea essentially turns the army mechanic into something similar to the fleet's mechanics. This could be great if done well in Stellaris. With different counters and army builds, there'll be a whole new depth to war. However, this will be an extremely tough undergoing for the development team, and would mean a whole DLC would probably need to be dedicated here, while also raising the complexity of Stellaris even more. The next mod is Under Siege. This removes the need, in most parts, to take planets, and gives an alternate solution. You could even go as far to just remove armies. But how does this mod work? If you take the starbase in a system with a planet, the planet is now under siege. The planet must produce its own food, minerals, energy, and consumer goods. If it doesn't, for each resource there will be 4 levels of shortage. Shortages have different effects. Sustenance is the most important to maintain. If you're a biological empire, you'll have major unhappiness if your planet has no food. After 12 months of the siege, a planet with low stability, less than 40, might surrender, with a scaling chance checked monthly. This goes one step further than combining fleets and armies by essentially just removing armies altogether. I think this idea could also be combined with armies staying in the game, by giving the player multiple options to take a planet. But again, this could be a quite complex undertaking and require a whole DLC, whereas this time could be spent elsewhere, but we'll get into that issue later on in the video. So let's see how other games deal with taking a planet or province. First, let's stay in the paradox sphere by looking at Crusader Kings 3's siege system. It's essentially the same as Stellaris, bigger number usually wins. There's a few ways to increase your odds of winning, but it's not too different. The biggest thing I like from here are the siege events that can add a unique flavor and different scenarios to your siege, but overall not too different. Now looking at EU4, now I'm not too good at EU4, but from what I can tell there's siege events that tick every month. The more events that happen, the more likely you will take the castle. You can increase this by your commander, artillery troops, or blockading the port, and you can counter it by increasing the fort level. This isn't really too different too, as it's just bigger number. Now last year for April Fools, Monty released a video leaking a ground combat rework. In this video, he joked that Hearts of Iron combat was introduced to the planets, and then Hearts of Iron combat would go to Battlefront. Obviously this was a massive joke, but if this sort of thing was implemented, it would turn very boring and repetitive after a while. Imagine doing this for 10 plus planets in one war. Now, breaking away from the paradox sphere, let's check out Distant Worlds 2. I'm not too clued up on this game, but I've played it a little bit. It looks quite similar to what we have now, but with just more customizability for ground troops. But it always comes back to bigger number, do better. Endless Space 2 has better visuals and 3 different types of armies, which I assume counter one another. This is essentially the same as Stellaris with a bit more rock, paper, scissors element. From looking at some other games, the capturing of planets or districts seem very similar to what we have now. I could be missing some great examples, so let me know in the comments if I did. But from what I've seen, there's not really a better way of doing things. With no surprises, changing the armies overwhelmingly won with 82% overall, with 8.7 thousand of you voting in this poll. However, I did break this down slightly, with 58% of you voting that it should be changed as soon as possible, and 24% of you accepting a rework if there were one. 13% of you didn't care, while only 2% of you actually like how it is now. Let's look more in detail at the comments. With a whopping 156 of them, I won't be able to include them all, but thanks for commenting. I'm going to try and summarize the general consensus or some comments I really like the sound of. So firstly, the top comment by Venick Hugh. They talk about it getting quite stressful if we were to manage the armies more than we do now. And as you can tell from the rest of this video, that's kind of where my opinions lie too. There are also a fair few comments that also mentioned they didn't want a new mechanical change, as it would just add to the complexity of the game. The next comment by Anfu, I don't know how to pronounce your name, I'm sorry, is a really interesting suggestion, with a few other comments also mentioning this. Armies could make use of the new ticking situations, which a few new events make use of, and when your economy collapses. Invading would take a lot of resources to maintain, and soldier jobs would decrease enemy effectiveness, making the invasion take longer and more costly. Espionage could also be used to spice this up. I really like this idea. It's low cost for the devs, as all the systems already exist, and makes more use for espionage, which is currently lacking. You could maybe make alternate tiers to what you can do, with more cost resulting in a faster collapse of the enemy. This idea is one of my favorite. There are a few comments mentioning quality of life features, like this one for instance by McBurns, who just wants a fleet-esque window so that they can recruit more and it automatically merges them into one army. It is quite a pain, but if you watch my hotkey tips video, you can kind of get around it, but this would be a nice change. There were a few comments about cosmetics or fluff, such as Vivid Biomass, who thinks the balance is fine, but they would like to see more art, flavor text, or feedback from your pops. And they also mention the situation mechanic. Or Low Poly Spartan would just like to see an animated screen for a bit more immersiveness in the game. Although this kind of does go against what Stellaris does with leaving it up to your imagination a lot. Commander Toast wants a whole new system that's optional, but they would just want to have artillery beats tank strategies in a new minigame, kind of like the Hoi 4 idea. And there were a fair few comments with a bit more thought put in, such as Spud here wanting a hero-like mechanic, or Beric breaking it down kind of like Endless Space 2, where you have different weapons, you have brutality, army size, or does your army want to negotiate? Should they be careful and reworking of different traits? Personally, I feel the army mechanic is good enough. This is a 4x space game, so the mechanics of taking planets do not need to be in depth. There could be some extra flavor or mechanics, but these could just add over complications that don't actually make it fun. Complexity is not always equal to fun. I'd rather the development team spend more time elsewhere. Take Overlords as an example. Would you rather they spend 6 months developing an army rework or overhauling the vassal system, adding a bunch more unique origins, civics, traits, and mid-game megastructures? I feel like there are other places that would benefit from a rework, such as espionage or internal politics, and it seems the dev team agree, with them announcing the First Contact story pack, which seems like it's revamping primitives, which is more in tune with a 4x game. If they did add anything, it would need to be new player friendly. It would need an auto setting if some players don't want to micro it, see the ship design, or even planet automation. Or the rework would have to not be gameplay intrusive like it is now, where you just build an army that has a number and you invade. However, I think the situation idea is the way I'd like it to go, as it can be automated and it's not too costly for the devs. So maybe even the custodian team could do it, and it's not overly complex. Now, this is just my opinion, and you probably disagree with me. If you do, comment. Try and convince me otherwise. I might have to make a second part if you do. Armies aside, if you've ever wondered the max amount of stars my computer can run, check out this video. We start from 50 stars and try and work our way up to 1 million stars in one galaxy.